Without further ado, I have some slide here, and also I'll accompany my slide presentation with just read my paper here. All right. So actually, my work is based primarily on two works on biomedical ethics. First is by the book of Islamic biomedical ethics by Professor Abdul Aziz Sashidina, and the other one is by Busham and Childress in Principles of Biomedical Ethics in Modern Secular Context. All right. Abdul Aziz Sashidina and his physician student, Farhat Muazzam, are well poised to initiate a dialogue between Islamic scholarship and modern bioethics. Muazzam studies empirically cases of biomedical ethics in Pakistan through her work, Bioethics and Organ Transplantation in Muslim Society in 2006. Nevertheless, Muazzam's work does not elaborate or sophisticated Islamic moral reasoning, which actually corresponds with the principles of modern bioethics. This lacuna is filled with the work of Abdul Aziz Sashidina's work, Islamic Biomedical Ethics in 2009. Sashidina attempts to formulate Islamic principles of biomedical ethics, which are drawn from Islamic legal and theological tradition. However, since the main aim of Sashidina's work is to introduce the discourse of bioethics in Islamic legal and ethical tradition to a Western audience, we cannot see a real conversation and comparison between Islamic and Western secular bioethical tradition in his works. Therefore, some questions are still not addressed comprehensively, including whether or not Islamic moral reasoning is compatible with the existing Western bioethical principles. If it is, how does it correspond with such contemporary bioethical principles and deal with certain biomedical issues? If it is not, then what is the peculiarity of Islamic reasoning compared to Western bioethics? So my paper actually will be devoted to an exploration to these questions. Oops, sorry. Yep. Now, before we going to compare between two traditions, let's try to understand the basic Islamic moral reasoning or legal reasoning. The term Islamic moral reasoning here is used to refer to a kind of moral reasoning which is based on religious sources and proofs ranging from the Quran, Sunnah of the Prophet, ijma or consensus, scholarly consensus, to different forms of religious reasoning. Based on the interpretation and assessment of the above religious proofs, Muslim scholars formulate legal and moral qualification of human action into 5 categories, as you can see here. Obligatory, prohibited, recommended, mandub, reprehensible, makruh, and permissible or mubah or halal. If the case under the discussion is univocally and conclusively addressed by textual sources, the moral and legal qualification of that case follows the textual injunction. However, this is the main problem here, in the case of matters in which sacred texts are ambiguous or metaphorical or silent, Muslim jurists or fuqaha employ series of legal reasoning and principles to determine their moral and legal status. Among the most popular juristic moral reasoning that Muslim jurists are using when the texts are silent or ambiguous is qiyas, or judicial analogy, istihsan, legal preference, istislah, or promote legal discretion to promote a common good. In addition to the legal and moral qualifications, Muslim jurists also formulate and derive moral principles from these legal moral logics to issue certain legal recommendations or tawsiyah, opinions or fatwas. Among those principles that result from qiyas reasonings are, for example, this is some of legal maxims derived from those reasonings. For example, one needs certainty, or certainty cannot be denied with doubt. Action depends upon attention. From istihsan, necessity makes lawful that which prohibited as long as it does not lead to any detriment. Hardship necessitated relief. Custom determines course of action. From istislah, for example, when it is inevitable, the lesser of two harms should be done. No harm shall be inflicted or reciprocated. No harm, no harassment. Harm must be rejected. Preventing or removing harm has priority over promoting good. Those are the examples of legal principles. Now, let's discuss the compatibility of Islamic moral and legal reasoning with modern secular bioethical principles. In Western biomedical ethics, the principle of non-maleficence is derived from a Hippocratic oath that says, above all, do no harm, primum non nocere. This principle of not inflicting harm, in fact, is a basic ethical principle shared by Western and Islamic medical culture, regardless some of distinctive aspects in each of them. In modern medical tradition, Busham and Childress, in their book, Principles of Biomedical Ethics, call the idea of not inflicting evil or harm the principle of non-maleficence. Although mental harms and setbacks of one's interests are taken into consideration, the concept of harm in their works emphasizes more on bodily harm, ranging from physical pain, disability, suffering to death. They particularly designate the concept of harm to a notion of intending, causing, or permitting death or the risk of death. In Islamic context, although Islamic physicians in medieval period were already familiar with Hippocratic oath and other works, the idea of do no harm in Islamic bioethics is much more inspired by Muslim jurists rather than their counterparts, especially philosophers and physicians. Islamic legal scholars base the principle of do no harm on the prophetic tradition, which states, La darar wa la dirar fil Islam. In Islam, there shall be no harm inflicted nor reciprocated. Based on this saying, they set Islamic biomedical ethics on the principle called no harm, no harassment. For a practical reason, however, I use the term la darar to refer to the idea of such no harm shall be inflicted nor reciprocated and its derivative principles. In other words, what is called non-maleficent in Western medical tradition is la darar in Islamic context. However, what does harm mean to Muslim legal scholars? The majority of Muslim jurists might argue that God is the one who can determine something harmful. Nevertheless, if the revelation or prophetic tradition does not provide a clear evidence of the parameters of harm in certain cases, the jurists come up with various opinions. The result of the ruling depends on the arguments that Islamic legal scholars use. When the jurists employ qiyas reasoning, they will try to find a similar case which is already treated by revelation of prophetic tradition. For example, causing harm to a human body is prohibited based on the prophetic tradition that says breaking the bone of the dead is equal to breaking the bone of a living person. According to qiyas argument, the legal judgment of inflicting harm to the body can be applied to the question of organ donation, for example. If the former is forbidden, the latter is prescribed as well. So the harm in this context is violating the textual injunction extended to qiyas reasoning, through qiyas reasoning. So if the perspective of istihsan is used, the definition of inflicting harm will also consider al-urf, or custom, situation, the context for the basis of reasoning. For the proponent of istihsan, of the practitioner of istihsan, the custom is considered a reliable source in determining the parameters of harm. Custom also establishes whether harm to oneself or to another party has been done in a given situation. If the custom regards harmful something for which revelation offers no specific evidence against, the harm in this context is determined by situation. In this regard, the definition of harm might vary depending on a particular context. For instance, in the case of organ donation, Muslim jurists agree that inflicting harm to the body means taking an organ from the donor is permissible under certain circumstances in order to avoid a greater harm, the death of a recipient. They cite the principles which states where it is inevitable, the lesser of two harms should be done, or necessity makes lawful that which is prohibited as long as it does not lead to any detriment. Another possibility of defining harm is through istislah, moral reasoning. By means of istislah, harm is perceived as failure to protect the primary objectives of religion. So here, yep. By means of so, for example, preserving religion, deen, life, nafs, reason, progeny, property, and some add human dignity as well. Muhammad al-Ghazali points out that the ability to preserve those primary objectives render an action maslaha, promoting common good, whereas inability to protect them is considered mafsada, the source of harm. Thus, whoever violates someone's religion, life, intellect, progeny, property, honor, is regarded as inflicting harm. Again, in this case, in the case of organ donation, for example, letting someone die because of not receiving a kidney donation from the donor is deemed inflicting harm and hence forbidden, mahzur. The moral status of seeking kidney donation for the one who is in need, therefore, is not only permissible, mubah, but also obligatory, wajib. Now, the second example of the compatibility of the equation between Western and Islamic biomedical principles. Beneficence is maslaha. In the context of modern bioethical discourse, the principle of beneficence is defined as a statement of moral obligation to act for the benefit of others. The action is in fact usually performed by individual to give benefit to another individual based on either spirit of altruism or moral obligation. The act of beneficence, which is motivated by altruism or an extreme generosity, is regarded as an ideal or general beneficence, whereas the one which is motivated by a mere moral obligation is called obligatory or specific beneficence. The prevalent practice of principle of beneficence, however, is the beneficence which is tied to certain moral obligation because the ideal is viewed to high standard. The religious principle that exists in the Islamic context is the concept of maslaha. Literally, maslaha means benefit or interest. It is also synonymous with istislah because the two terms have the same linguistic root, which is salaha, promoting good. So, from terminology point of view, the maslahah can be defined as a principle of reasoning to derive new rulings or as method of suspending earlier rulings out of consideration for the interest and the welfare of the community. It is quite clear from this definition that notion of beneficence in Western tradition resembles the idea of maslahah in Islam in terms of the importance of giving benefit for others. The motive of giving benefit is also quite similar in principle of maslahah, although the extreme generosity or ikhlas sometimes become the motive of giving benefit to others. The primary motive underlining such action is still moral obligation. There are many terms used to depict such obligations, such as qurbani, sacrifice, duty, fard, necessity, majburi. Nevertheless, there is a salient peculiarity in each notion regarding the recipients of the intended benefit. In the principle of maslahah, the recipient of benefit seems to be more general rather than in the principle of beneficence, in the sense that maslahah requires securing benefit to the people as a whole and not particular person or groups of persons. For example, donating kidney to a family member in Pakistan deemed sacrifice or qurbani, which aims to secure not only the life of the recipient, but also the survival of the family. This is why maslahah is usually translated as public interest or common good as opposed to the notion of individual interest. In this respect, in addition to maslahah that is deemed secondary hajiyat or tertiary tahsiniyat, Muslim scholars conceptualize essentials of maslahah, which consists of 5 or 6 essential values should be promoted, which is a protection of religion, life, intellect, lineage, property, and human dignity. All right, so actually I have one more point to present, how to adjudicate when these two principles are in conflict. For example, when the non-maleficent and the principle of beneficence are in conflict, the Western tradition, they use the principle, the tool called weighing and balancing, or permissive binding. So certain principle can be applied as far as it not contradict with another principle or stronger principle. For example, non-maleficence is considered stronger than the principle of beneficence. Quite the same thing, analogous situation with the principle of bioethics in Islamic tradition. There are at least 4 rules that can be used to adjudicate when they are in conflict. So some of them, one of them is when two interests in conflict, let the one that which will be greater benefit take precedent. Okay. Based on the above discussion, we can conclude that there are some general commonalities between the principles of biomedical ethics and Islamic moral reasoning and its principles. Both of them have a deep concern with three ethical issues in bioethics: the principle of not inflicting harm, the rules of finding the best interest or common good, and the ways of weighing and balancing or specifying when there is a conflict among moral principles. Indeed, the principle of Maleficence can be equated with the principle of la Darar, and the principle of Beneficence can be associated with the theory of Maşlaha. Based on such commonalities, I believe that Islamic legal moral reasoning and its principles are compatible with modern bioethics. These commonalities could become not only a basis for further dialogue between two cultures, but also enrichment of biomedical insights for both medical traditions. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Jazakallah khair, soon to be Dr. Widigdo. So we'll look forward to your future presentations when your dissertation is completed.